It's easier to be in someone's absence or someone's presence than to be in the constant presence of their absence. It's
Yeah.
easier to be with somebody
Yep.
or to be absent from somebody than to be doing what we're doing where it's obvious every moment that we're not together.
Welcome to The Defense Never Rests with Morgan and Akins, your monthly dose of uncommon sense about all things legal and some that are not.
Hey everyone, welcome back to The Defense Never Rests. On this week's episode, we have as our guest Dr. Robert Bolander. He's a professor in the Department of Psychology at Wilkes University and also has his own clinical psychology practice. In addition to all those things, he's my dad. He's great. My wife and I watched The Social Dilemma, which is a Netflix documentary 2 weeks ago now, and it had a pretty profound impact on us. Part of the documentary is about government spying and algorithms used to figure out what the users want to see and keep you connected, et cetera. But another part is the ramifications from mental health of social media, of being constantly connected, of COVID, of the kind of civil unrest in this country, the divisiveness in the country, and we're seeing it in every facet of society. And I've been speaking to my dad quite a bit about that, and he's seeing it in his clinical practice. He's seeing it with his students. He's done research on it, and I think he's really well positioned to give some statistics and some dire research about what kind of happens to us mentally, physiologically, and et cetera when we have these issues go on with our bodies, but also give some great examples and some great ideas as to how we can overcome them. So without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Bolander to The Defense Never Rests. And welcome to Dr. Robert Bolander, our guest this week on The Defense Never Rests. How are you doing?
I'm well. How about you?
Good. I have to say I'd be remiss if I didn't, over your left, my right shoulder, the terrible towel hanging there after yesterday's big win, 7-0 this year for our beloved Steelers. So good product placement, and I'm happy that you included that there.
I quickly hung it up this morning.
Yeah. So real quick, can you just go through your background, kind of how you got to be where you are right now?
Sure. Well, I went to college at Lebanon Valley as a psychology major, Lebanon Valley College, and I went on to the University of Rochester, where I got a PhD in psychology with a supplemental specialization in neurophysiology from the medical school, the Center for Brain Research. And then I came right to Wilkes University here in Wilkes-Barre in 1979, and I've been here on the faculty since. This is my 42nd year of teaching. I'm a professor of psychology here. I'm also the co-director of the the Neurotraining and Research Center here on campus. And I have a clinical practice, which I've maintained for about 35 years. I'm a Pennsylvania licensed psychologist. And that's pretty much who I am and what I've been
Okay.
doing for decades.
And most importantly,
I'm your dad.
thank you. Okay. I don't know when that was going to be mentioned. God, biggest accomplishment. So for those that don't know, what is neurophysiology? Because you said that was your subspecialty as a PhD.
Basically, the study of the brain and nervous system and how it controls the body and how it affects the mind.
And we're going to talk about some of that today, but would it be right to say that that's linked to anxiety, stress, connectivity with social media that can affect not only your mood and your kind of outwardly behavior, but also your brain and also your physiology?
Sure, absolutely. There's a concept called neuroplasticity, which means that every experience we have, every thought we have affects the brain chemistry and brain structure. So your brain is constantly evolving with every conversation you have. Your brain will be different at the end of this podcast than it was at the start. Um, and that can be for the good or for the ill. I mean, if you engage in meditation practice, your brain is better off at the end of that practice. If you engage in 30 minutes of being worried and anxious about things, then your brain is worse off for that experience. So the brain is constantly changing over time. Again, it's called neuroplasticity, and we want to try to make the best use of that to improve people's mental health and well-being.
And I will get into this as well, but I'm assuming that's not just the short term. It's not just micro doses of kind of day by day, but over a decade, it could really change the anatomy and the physiology of your brain.
Oh, sure, absolutely. In fact, there's a scale that we sometimes give to kids called the Adverse Child Experience Scale. And there's 10 questions about problem experiences that kids might have, like having a parent with a mental illness, or having parents who are divorced, or having a drug abuse in the house, and so on. And the more of these adverse experiences kids have when they're 3, 4, 5, 6 years of age, we see it down the road in terms of mental health problems 20, 30 years later, as well as physical health problems, everything from alcoholism to COPD and so on. So, yeah, these experiences can have a chronic effect, again, for the good or for the ill.
Well, the reason we're kind of doing the podcast, in addition to just it's fun to do, is my wife and I watched a Netflix documentary called The Social Dilemma. And it had kind of two parts. One was how Google and Facebook and other online social media platforms use algorithms to track usage, to figure out what you want. When you look up, I need new shoes on your phone, you get it through all the other avenues of streaming systems that you have. But another big part of that documentary was the long-term effect in so many ways of our constant connectivity to devices, to the computer, to social media. And I kind of wanted to get into some of that today because I one of my good friends just announced he's off of all social media. He was a real big tweeter, Instagrammer, Facebooker, and he said, I'm done. I watched the documentary. I thought about my kids and I'm done. I think there's a real pushback going on with that. And I know, from me visiting, I'm always on my phone. I'm always checking things. I'm always on my computer. And I don't think that was the way it was when you were growing up. But I wanted to kind of talk about the ramifications of that, both in terms of behavior, and which includes happiness and things like that, but also in terms of how it's changing our bodies over time.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing I just wanted to bring up was social media. I mean, social media is pervasive in so many areas of our life. And I know there's so many studies coming out now about the long-term effects of what social media is doing to different populations, including, children, especially adolescents and teenagers, and even adults. So I'll just leave it at that, and you can say what you've seen in your practice and with your students, and then we can go off of that.
Well, that's 3 or 4 podcasts right there, just that one issue. But certainly social media, it can have positive effects. I mean, I kept in touch with some of my high school friends on Facebook for a while, which was really, really nice to be able to do. I wouldn't have been able to do that without that platform. But I did get off of that platform because it began to be kind of negative and divisive posts and so on, which is a real problem. And certainly if we take that to the extreme, I mean, there have been documented cases of kids, teenagers who have suicided because of online bullying that was made possible because of that platform. I mean, if you want to bully a kid, you can gather together 1,000 people to join you in that effort. And it has some really negative consequences. That's kind of the extreme of it, I think. But there's lots of studies that show that the more months and years that people are on social media, the more likely it is they're going to be depressed. And that's not just a correlational study, that's actually a causal effect, largely because when you're looking at other people's social media posts, the image is created that they're wonderfully happy, their lives are great, they have great jobs, their children are perfect, their marriages are perfect, they go on the best vacations, and you're living your little life so desperately unlike that it's that the we call it social comparison is devastating. And I think that kind of makes a lot of people feel pretty bad about themselves. Whereas we do know that a lot of the posts that people put up on media are exaggerations or they're not true. And I bet, Nate, you're aware of situations or people who maybe might not be in a great marriage, or they might not be having a good life or a good job, and yet their posts indicate that everything is wonderful. And of course, other people are looking at that and thinking, why is my life so horrible by comparison? So that's another major issue.
But the problem is you're not living their life to see the down parts, right?
Correct.
So you're living your life when you're changing diapers and cleaning the toilet and doing all that day-to-day stuff, and then you're going and seeing, oh my God, look at the picture of them on the beach, all wearing matching outfits. But you're not seeing them do the same menial tasks that you're doing.
No, and that's what makes the comparison so devastatingly depressing. And like I say, there is this long-term effect of creating depression by being on social media. So I think people who walk away from it are doing a wonderful thing, even if it's just for a short period of time. And that's one of the messages I'd like to deliver today, is just take a break from it, even if you're not going to get off of it permanently. Set a time of day, from 6 p.m. to midnight or 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. I'm off social media. All my friends would know that. They know not to contact me if I don't respond immediately or click or like their post. It's because they know that I'm taking a break away.
Yeah.
I think we all need that time away.
One of the funniest things that I think is when people announce they're taking a break on social media, therefore perpetuating the same problem that people think that they care about them on social media.
Yeah.
People say, I'm hereby, it's like they're reading a scroll from the medieval times. I, Nathan Bolander, hereby take a break for the next 3 hours. Like people,
And nobody cares.
No one cares at all. No. Although we were mentioning that, I know, and we all know people that project happiness on that platform, and then maybe, or any platform, and then maybe don't have the best lives behind the scenes. I can attest to times when I've been with other individuals. They post about that time that I was just with them glowingly when they fought the whole time amongst themselves, or they were sick, or something bad happened. And they just, and so you wouldn't know that unless you were actually present, which I was. But
Yeah.
so they're like, Nate visited today. Look at all the fun we had. Well, they argued the whole time, or someone had terrible, GI issues, and they didn't post that. They posted the one picture that was taken where everyone was okay.
Right. They smile for the selfie, and then the rest of it is bad news.
That's right. And speaking about when you said no one cares, I think, is it creating a situation with teenagers where they think people care and they think the world revolves around them, and then maybe their kind of sphere of influence grows and grows, at least the way they see it. And when they get out in the world, they say, wait, not everyone cares about me as much as I thought.
That's one of the problems that has a lot to do with also things like bulldozer parents and helicopter parents who clear the way for their kids and make sure their kids don't have to deal with any kind of stress or problem, and then they get out in the world and they realize there's no one there to really run that kind of interference. And that's kind of related to maybe young people's inability to deal with COVID. But there's such a thing as we call the imaginary audience that teenagers have. They think when they walk into a room, everyone's looking at them and what they're wearing and how their hair is done and so on. In fact, no one's looking at anybody but themselves. But if you think that, then you believe whatever you post on social media is very, very important, and everyone should be looking at it. And if you don't get the requisite number of likes, it's devastating. You get angry with your followers. Why are you not liking what I just posted? It's extremely important.
And the interesting thing is, to like someone's life or a piece of their life, back when you were a kid, took a lot, right? You had to bike to their house or drive there and say, I like that. Or you had to go to dinner, or you had to call them on their home telephone, ask their parents to talk to them, right? And I grew up with the era of the cell phone, so it's a little bit, but now it's as quick as, I know people, I've seen people on the subway or whatever, scrolling through like, and maybe the person receiving that is saying, oh, they care. That person stopped and liked my stuff. When in reality, it's just this person's just indiscriminately everything's fine. And maybe it boosts up their, they have 300 likes and none of those 300 people cared.
It's the irony of calling them Facebook or social media friends. What is the meaning of a friend? The meaning of a friend has changed tremendously in the past few decades. Friends used to be someone who, if you called them up and said, I'm moving, can you give up your Saturday and help me move? They would be right there to help you. That was a friend. Yep. Today's a friend is somebody who likes your posts.
Right. So. And we're mentioning mostly with children, but do you see it in your students, and do you see it with adults in your practice, that they are having social media related issues long-term, or even just based on one post short-term?
Oh, sure. Even in the practice with adults, there's social media issues that are dividing couples, where one of them is on social media all the time in the evening, or maybe gaming or something like that, and the other spouse is feeling very neglected, and it can really create some problems in a marriage.
I think it's probably exacerbated during. You're seeing it in practice during COVID. It's worse than it's been because people are connected, and we'll get into the connectivity part of this, but I would imagine that Facebook and Instagram are loving this. They think they're probably 300% more people checking it every 10 seconds than they're used to.
Oh yeah. It's a growing problem in COVID. So many things like this are getting exacerbated, as you say, by COVID, as people are spending more time at home. They're isolated from work. They're isolated from social activities outside the house, and so they're looking for socialization through the media. And it's just it's not the same thing. It's not the same thing.
Yeah. So let's just real quick segue to the connectivity part, and this is the part that I suffer the most from. I had a moment last week I'm not proud of, or 2 weeks ago, I'm not proud of, where I went to the bathroom and was using the bathroom here at work, and I was in the middle of using the bathroom.
Where are we going with this?
it'll be. This is the Defense Never Rests. This is PG rated. I promise you.
I see.
But the natural instinct was to reach in my pocket and look at my phone.
Mhm.
I hadn't looked at my phone in damn near 20 seconds since I walked down the
Mhm.
hall. Maybe something had happened.
Yeah.
And I kind of, I didn't have a panic attack or anything like that, but I was legitimately like, what am I going to do for the next 10 seconds?
Mhm.
What, I guess just think, oh God, I can't wait to get back to my phone. And that's, I mean, I'm not technologically savvy, but that's
Mhm.
every single person that I see. I just hung out
Sure.
with some people yesterday, watched football, and that's, we're just the game, the phone, the game, the phone, the game, the phone. So again, I'll open it up to you and say, what have you seen and what are the major problems? And then we'll just talk about that.
Yeah, well, people do not want to be away from their phones. There's no question about it. I mean, I have students who are telling me that when they take a shower in the morning, they have to have their phone right outside the shower, and during their shower, they'll reach out and check to see if anyone has texted them. That really to me just seems very extreme. But I didn't grow up in the era of connectivity like that. But no, people want to be connected. Certainly, there was a study recently where college students were put in a room for 15 minutes. They had to give up their cell phone, put in a room for 15 minutes to, in quotes, be alone with your thoughts. And they could push a buzzer if it got so uncomfortable they wanted to be let out. And so many of them pushed the buzzer. They couldn't stand being alone for 15 minutes. And in fact, if some of them were offered a mild electric shock to be permitted to leave the room even earlier than that, and many of them took the shock to be able to get out of the room and get back to their phones. I mean, that's pretty serious stuff.
It is. And that wasn't even an issue in the 90s. I mean, it wasn't, this has not been going on for 5 decades. This is so recent. But even
Right.
back when I was in college, I mean, I only think I had a cell phone until I was a junior in college. And I think you gave it to me for only emergencies. And I remember it was, $4 a minute, and so it was like, please use this only if you're dying. But I mean, this is not a long-standing thing. There's 2 generations or 3 generations maybe of people on this earth that didn't have any of this. It's not even a thought to them.
Correct. That's right.
And now these people are growing up that way.
Yeah, and you wonder where it's headed, and will people continue to be that dependent on being connected when they're 30, 40, 50 years of age, and what's it going to do to relationships?
Right.
And the other thing, it's taking you away from other things, not just relationships, hobbies, things of that sort. Imagine somebody who wants to maybe on a Saturday afternoon for a couple of hours do some oil painting as a hobby. If that person has to stop every few minutes and check their phone, I mean, what's that going to do to their creativity, to their ability to produce a product? I mean,
Right.
it affects everything.
Yep. The only times I've felt completely disconnected the last 5 to 10 years are when I am abroad and on airplane mode and I don't have Wi-Fi.
And how does that feel?
Wonderful.
Mhm.
Wonderful. It does. I mean, and this year, because of COVID, our honeymoon was moved from Europe to here, and we went hiking, and I brought my phone in case there's an emergency. But I found myself when I would take a picture of the 2 of us or nature, I would, well, you know what? Oh, there is a work email. I don't have to answer it right now because I am on my honeymoon. But
Mhm.
and then when we start the hike again, I think, I can't believe Plans Council said that. How am I going to respond to that? Let me think strategically. And you need the time to shut off. And we'll get into that too. But I mean, the only times I really felt that way, you think you're going to feel that way on a Saturday or a Sunday or a holiday, and it just never comes. You need complete away, and I have a colleague, Oliver, who, even though he only goes domestically on vacation, goes to places where there is no service, so he's not tempted. I mean, that's the
Purposely.
point. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. You ask about college students.
Right.
Just one of my observations is when I was in college and before class, in the 5-10 minutes before class, when all the students would assemble before the professor came in, we would talk with each other. We would get to know each other. Where are you from? I mean, friendships were formed that way.
Mhm.
Rides home were arranged that way.
Yeah.
All that sort of thing. Today, of course, you go into the classroom. Everybody, as soon as they sit down, has their face buried in their phone, and to look out at this sea of people staring at their screens, I mean, it's almost comical. And I have taken photos of this just because I couldn't believe what it looked like. It was almost like zombies lined up at their desks with their
Yep.
faces in their phones. It was
Yep.
quite remarkable. They're not saying a thing. They're not talking.
No, and that's the same thing on subways, right? The same thing on, I can imagine it's everywhere in life. Everyone's got their face down. We went for a run the other day, and I had 4 close encounters with phone watchers when I was running. They're walking towards me, and I'm running towards them. We have 13 seconds to figure this out, who's going which way. But when their head's buried in the phone, I think, are they going to hear my footsteps? Are they going to hear? No, I mean, they could get run over by a bus and they wouldn't know because
Is isn't it true in Philly you have cell phone lanes on the sidewalk?
there are,
right?
but only right downtown. I mean, we were kind of a little more south, but right downtown there's a picture of a person doing this.
Mhm.
And I know from my chiropractor that he said he's seeing a lot of people who have hunchbacks, and they say, "Oh, I bet you because you work in front of a computer." No, I don't. I'm a park ranger. Well, how do you have a? Oh, well, and then they're in the waiting room, and then, oh, well,
Mhm.
there you go. That's how they're developing that.
Right.
So what is not turning your brain off? So we were talking about me being away and turning my phone off. What is not turning your brain off to being connected do over time physiologically? Does it have effects where it's not, your brain can't relax, your brain can't kind of just enjoy what's around you, look at the trees, look at the
Well,
rolling hills?
exactly. You're not present in the moment, we call it. There's so much in life, so much in nature to see. And you talked about, being out hiking and taking pictures, of you and your wife hiking, et cetera, and nature. There's so much of that to see. There's so much beauty. There's so much calmness that's out there. We miss it all because we're zooming past it. No pun intended. We're traveling past it with our eyes in the phone or thinking about something else. It doesn't allow your brain to rest at all. It burns up tremendous amounts of metabolic energy, and it causes mental exhaustion. So you don't have the time when you get home to spend with family or to maybe do a hobby or something like that because you're mentally spent. Your
I think
brain needs downtime.
aren't there studies that if you're on a screen right before bedtime, that also affects your sleep patterns and you don't relax?
Sure, and having the screen on while you're sleeping, the type of light that gets through your eyelids and into your brain has a stimulating effect, and it does not let your brain get into the deep stages of sleep. There's 5 stages of sleep. Two of them are the most restorative. It's called deep sleep, and that's what enables your brain and body to rejuvenate for the next day. Though that type of sleep is disturbed by a blue screen shining through your eyelids.
Right, right.
And I know
I,
sleep is one of the issues you want to talk about, and it's certainly a problem these days.
right. Well, I think it's kind of bleeding into another topic as well, because I think there's a badge of honor in always being connected and never sleeping. I think people that hear, I work 12 to 14-hour days, I'm always on, I will respond to you immediately, and I only need 4 hours a night. And people look at that and they say, wow, what a guy or gal. Like it's a wonderful existence. You are a hard worker, you have great work ethic, but I have to feel like over time, that is not, you're not going to be as productive for as long, first of all. And second of all, you may develop pretty serious health issues.
Yeah, and first of all, I wouldn't believe all of those folks either.
Well,
Uh,
yeah, right,
you know,
right,
especially if they posted it on social media. I mean, we know that a lot of stuff that people post is not is
right.
is not true. But no, that's not a badge of honor. That's a recipe for disaster, because you do need, even an adult, needs a reasonable number of hours of sleep every night to get rejuvenated, and you're not doing anybody any favors by working those long hours and not getting decent sleep. And it's going to come back and be a problem. You're not going to be as efficient at work. You're not going to make as good of decisions, and it's bad for your health. I mean, sleep deprivation is very much related to health problems, and in fact shortened life.
Yeah.
So you're not doing yourself any favors with being a
So
hero.
what are the things that you see over time, when you see a person in your clinical practice or when you read research, over time people get less sleep and are more anxious? What are the top 5 things that people develop over time? You said shorten life. That's pretty serious. But are there certain conditions that you see that people will almost always get if they live this way, if they live always
Oh,
connected and always on?
well, sure. The common denominator is stress, and stress is a trigger for many different kinds of illnesses. Stress exacerbates the symptoms of a variety of illnesses, from diabetes to asthma. Stress is the forerunner of many anxiety disorders and depression. So stress is constant chronic stress is something your body was never designed to deal with. Our bodies were designed to deal with stress that lasted minutes, hours, maybe a couple of days, and then your body could reset and rejuvenate itself. But the kind of stress we have today, where it's 24/7, is just, it's causing not only mental and physical health issues, but damage to the nervous system. A part of the brain called the hippocampus, which is important in learning and memory, is actually damaged by chronic stress over a period of years. So the effects certainly add up, and anything you can imagine that's damaging to the brain or body or mental health will happen.
Do you see, with respect to you just said with respect to students, you see them on their phone constantly, and they're not
Mhm.
maybe making the interpersonal relationships in person that they would have 20 years ago or longer. But in terms of your practice, which is I don't want to put words in your mouth. Is it mostly adults in your practice?
Mostly adults,
Okay.
some teens. I don't work with young children, but mostly adults, some teenagers.
Okay. Do you see that that's the connectivity is ruining relationships, or it's causing people to lose jobs, or it's having major effects on people because they're so connected to things?
Yeah, in fact, I could think of several different cases of adults. These are middle-aged adults who are constantly checking up on their spouse's social media posts and who's liking them and
Mhm.
who's commenting on them. There's a lot of suspiciousness, sometimes even paranoia that's involved, with worrying about, is your spouse communicating with somebody else through
Right.
social media?
Right.
That's just one specific problem.
Right. I would also assume it's just time, right? Like if someone gets home from work and they want to chat about their day, and the other person's just on their phone, I imagine they're almost ignoring them for everyone else in their life on
Sure.
social media.
Sure. I mean, it's the same you would see, let's say, at a restaurant where, two people are sitting with their heads in their phones. They're not communicating. They're not talking about things, and if one of them doesn't want to do that, they're going to be very offended that the other one is giving their time to social media instead of them. Yeah.
Right. Right. And that's why I always try. I mean, it's still rude, but I always try, and I guess you can probably attest to it when I'm home for dinner or something. We'll say, what actor was in that movie? And I say, I will just be checking that item, and then I will look at my phone so that people don't think I'm just reading sports scores or something.
But then you don't check your texts at the same time you're
Of course I
just
do. Of
coming
course
up
I
with
do.
this.
Yeah, of course I
Okay.
do. Well, because you know why, and interestingly, this documentary that we watched, the ways in which the alerts are given to people have been specifically developed to psychologically uh, test you or to incentivize you to look, right? So to get new posts on Facebook, there's alerts right pop up on your phone. So when you look at just the home screen, you will see all those alerts right up
Hmm.
front. You don't have to go searching for them.
Hmm.
Then when you're on Facebook or I'm on LinkedIn quite a bit, it'll say, as you're reading stuff, bing, bing, new posts. And then what you have to do is click on it and drag down. And I'm sure you've seen that. And then it will repopulate the newest things up front. And so there's always this, and you know that, I mean, that's how email works too. But
Yeah.
the way that it's almost like incentivizing, tricking you into keep looking. And of course, the algorithms behind the scenes are giving you the stuff you want, right? You just
Oh,
look for
sure.
new shoes. So how about these shoes? So how about these shoes?
Sure.
And this morning I read a lot about the Steelers so on Google. So I went to YouTube to listen to a podcast walking into work, and it said, "Don't you want to hear about the Steelers won yesterday? Don't you want to hear about that?" I mean, so it's a very, I mean, I assume, I don't know if you know this, but I assume there's psychologists behind the scenes like crazy at these companies developing these algorithms.
Oh, sure. Just this morning in my personality class, I talked about it, some research Facebook did some years ago with an app called My Personality. It was like 2007 to 12. It was an app that was available, and you could answer these questions, and it actually assessed your personality. And of course, that data then was owned by Facebook. And what they did is they had marketers design ads that were targeted toward, let's say, if you were an introvert versus an
Mhm.
extrovert, targeted toward one group or the other, and then they looked at how many clicks there were, how many likes there were of that ad, and how many people clicked on the ad to follow it and to actually purchase a product. And the ads that were targeted to introverts, one of them was for beauty products, and it said, "Beauty doesn't have to shout." And it was a picture of a woman putting on some eye makeup by herself. Introverts love that ad and bought that product because of that ad. And then there was an ad targeted extroverts that was dance like nobody else is looking, though you totally know they are. And extroverts love that ad.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
so yes, absolutely. This is part of the business world,
yep, yep. And so, do you think there's gonna be a backlash to this? Like you're kind of seeing some little chinks in the armor here, but with Google Glass, right? The glasses that you wear you'll have pop-up displays right in front of your face, so you don't even need to do anything. It's right there. But do you think there's not a revolution, but do you think there's a big pushback coming where society is going to get to a breaking point and say we can't be on all the time at all points? We're going to have to get back to nature. We're going to have to get back to knowing our family like we used to and having a normal dinner.
I think that eventually it'll get to that point. Sometimes it takes just a sort of a major event to do that. I know with 9/11 in 2001, so many people changed their attitudes and perspectives about the importance of family and spending more time with family and being less socially connected or on social media and so on. But sometimes it takes a major event like that to really make people sit back and say, what is important in my life? Where do I want to be spending my time? But I think everything that builds and builds and builds will eventually peak and then go on the downhill slide. It's just part of the evolution of nature. So I think that will happen. There'll be pushback. Yeah.
There's already some apps that you could download that shuts your phone off, and there's already I famously there was a bar in I think Seattle where the pint glasses all had cutouts the size of iPhones, and so you had to put your iPhone on the table to have your pint glass not fall
I
over.
love it.
It was wonderful, and it got a lot of social attention. I just feel like if kids these days are used to more connectivity, then they're going to grow up being fine with Google Glass, right? That's not going to be a problem for them. And then their kids will grow up with billboards all over the place. I mean, it's just, I feel like the more you get used to it generationally, then the more your kids will be used to it. Where will it go?
But it can only go so far. Everything can only go so far before it reverses. I mean, this is probably not a great example, but in terms of models, models have gotten thinner and thinner and thinner over the years, and that's considered to be a very attractive kind of body stature.
Right,
And now they're at the point where if they get any thinner, they're going to be too weak to show up for
right,
photo shoots,
right,
and they're,
right.
they're going to look emaciated and
Mhm.
skeletal. So there's a limit. There's a
Right,
natural limit to that.
right. Well, the last big topic I want to talk about was the two major things going on right now. And just for full disclosure, we're taping this the day before the election. When this is put up, it'll be after the election, so I think people can breathe after that. But COVID and the election, I'll open it back up just in terms of COVID. What kind of problems are you seeing that wouldn't normally be seen under traditional circumstances?
Yeah, well, this has been a perfect storm with COVID, and then the divisiveness that's existed in the country since the last election, and has ramped up more recently with the coming election. It's a perfect storm of stress and frustration and anger, and it's just, I mean, these things are sort of synergistically affecting one another. People are getting more and more worried about COVID because what happens depending on the election, and then they're worried about the outcome of the election and when's COVID going to go away, and all these things are intertwined, and it's making the problems a lot worse for sure.
Are you seeing that with in your private practice, where have people come to you just because of COVID and said, "I have a problem with COVID," or I'm very nervous about that"?
No, no one's come specifically for COVID, but in our discussions with new clients or new patients, it's always an issue, degree of concern about COVID. And of course, I'm seeing some patients face to face with masks and social distancing, and that cuts into the degree of connectivity we have between two people in the practice. Other people are opting for telehealth, which has its own issues, especially if it's a new client trying to get
Mhm.
established rapport and trust. I mean, how do you do that? You look at facial expressions, you look at eye contact, and sadly over Zoom or any kind of platform like that, you can't have perfect eye contact because the camera isn't in the middle of the screen.
Right.
People's eyes are never really focused. So though people aren't coming in because of COVID, COVID is always the elephant in the room, I think, for our sessions
Right.
right now.
No, you mentioned telehealth. Are you trying to steer away from the first sessions being in telehealth so you can at least establish a rapport, then you can move to that?
Yeah, it's easier to do that, to establish the trust and rapport with a patient
Hmm.
in face-to-face sessions. Even though, again, sadly, we're masked. I mean, it's a little bit of a trade-off that when I see them in telehealth, I can see their mouth and facial expressions, which makes it easier. But on the other hand, there's this separation through the machine,
Hmm.
which takes away from establishing rapport. But no, it's probably better to see them in person first, and if they want to switch to telehealth, that's a little easier once you've established the trust.
Right. Yeah. And same thing works. So we had a conversation recently about depositions. The same thing applies to us, where over Zoom you can't tell as many things, but you can see their full face. In person with a mask, you can't see some of their tells, but you're in the room with them, and you kind of need both. You need to be in the room with them with no mask on to really get the full experience of picking up little things that
Right.
tell a lot about someone. I mean, I think you and I not judge people. That's a terrible thing to say. We analyze people in different ways for different purposes.
Hmm.
I think everyone does, but we do it in our professions. And I think that's so hard to do over Zoom or even in the same room with masks on, because you
Well,
can't see when people are smirking
there's there's
versus
trem-
something.
there's tremendous limitations, and that's part of what leads to Zoom fatigue. Is
Mhm.
is your brain is working so hard to fill in the blanks consciously that normally your unconscious mind picks up on. When you're talking with a client at a deposition, you're not necessarily consciously thinking about everything that they're doing and every movement they're making, but you're processing that unconsciously.
Mhm.
But when you have Zoom, you're trying to infer consciously
Yeah,
all these things that you really can't. It makes your brain work super hard,
right.
and that's one of the most fatiguing things.
And what is Zoom fatigue? Because you use that term. I've read that term. What does that
It's
mean?
it, basically what's a big topic these days. Harvard Business School just had an article about it. They published, but it's people just being mentally fatigued because of Zoom meetings, and not just one Zoom meeting, but constant Zoom meetings. Many companies have one after the next, and it's every Zoom meeting is mentally draining in its own way. And if you have these back to back with very little break and they're long meetings and so on, it just takes a toll on your mental abilities,
Yep.
and they get burned out on it.
Right.
So there's a lot of things that are recommended that we change about Zoom. Like, if you don't have to have a Zoom meeting, don't have it.
Mhm.
If it's a social Zoom meeting, allow people to opt out if they don't want to be involved in the social Zoom meeting, the non-work meeting, just
Right.
social. Don't try to multitask during a Zoom meeting. Uh, uh, Try not to pay attention to any faces other than the speaker on the Zoom meeting.
Yeah.
These are all little things you can do. Make the Zoom meeting shorter, half the length, so people
Right.
can get up and walk around, and allow people to get up and walk around during a Zoom meeting without it looking like they don't care or they're not paying attention.
Right.
Just say, listen, if everybody wants to get up and walk around for a few minutes and come back and join us, do it. We
Yeah.
we won't think that you've lost interest.
Right. Yeah. And we had we have very few, and that's a testament, I think, to our firm. But we have 2 a week, and it's a total of about 25 minutes total. And
Mhm.
and then we have other ones for different cases, and we have depositions, we have mediations and things. But I mean, I think a lot of organizations, firms, and colleges and whomever have a lot more per week, and we limit it to as soon as there's kind of a lull in conversation. All right, we done. All right, we're done, and we get off, and
Mhm.
it's refreshing, and it's nice to see. I'm in the office today. It's nice to see people in person. I'd much prefer that than
Mhm.
trying to catch up over a Zoom happy hour. I mean, they're nice, but
Yeah.
what are you drinking there? Oh, I have this. What is that? Just put it up to the screen. I mean, it's a very impersonal way to go about doing things.
Yeah, I just encountered a quote the other day. It's something like this. I might be misquoting it. It's easier to be in someone's absence or someone's presence than to be in the constant presence of their absence.
That's
It's
yeah.
easier to be with somebody
Yep.
or to be absent from somebody than to be doing what we're doing, where it's obvious every moment that we're not together,
Right.
that we're
Yeah.
we're doing
Yeah.
this electronically.
That's a
And
good quote. Yeah.
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 I think psychologically that really takes a toll as well.
Yeah. So what are some of the, I know there's some statistics out there, and you probably looked at them far more than most people. So what are the kind of the trends that are happening during COVID? What are the measurables that you're seeing in different populations because of COVID and being home and working remotely and all those things?
Well, the research is just starting to come out. Normally, it takes about a year for data to be collected and analyzed and then gotten ready for publication and be published. But some of the preliminary stuff is coming out, and yeah, it's things you would expect. I mean, it's things that everybody's experiencing. There's no surprises. Alcohol consumption is up. Um, Opioid use is up. Suicides are up. Depression rates are up. Anxiety disorders are up, especially in children, and teenagers. There's just all sorts of problems that
Yep.
are related to COVID. And again, nothing that you would surprise you.
Right.
An interesting statistic is that child abuse reports dropped pretty substantially at the beginning of COVID and the lockdowns.
Mhm.
But that's very deceiving, because the people who normally turn in those reports, school teachers, daycare workers, pediatricians, were not seeing kids.
Right. Yeah.
And then emergency room visits for injuries to kids, probably from abuse, are up. So there's
Yeah. Yeah.
probably more abuse going on and less being reported now.
Right.
Because of the situation. There's
Yeah.
tremendous prices to pay for the kinds of, not even just lockdowns, but the restrictions
Yeah.
that we're seeing. It's a double-edged sword. I mean, yes, it keeps people safer in certain ways, but mental health issues and suicides and depressions. And I think we're going to see we're going to see the effects of this for years, if not decades.
Right. So where do you think we're moving in terms of working remotely? And do you think that's healthy in terms of your mental health? I mean, it seems to me like a lot of companies are giving up their urban offices and saying work remotely. And we were certainly set up to do that even before COVID. And if people do that, I mean, the plus is work in your sweatpants, no commute, more time at home to, we're showing our apartment so we can be home to do that. But what's the downside?
Yeah, well, again, if you do it right, if you work at home properly,
Mhm.
all those benefits can happen. But if you don't do it properly, it can be a real problem. Um, it's important for people to be able to separate their work life and their family life, and that's really really hard for people who are working at home, especially with kids. But even if they don't have kids, because they're trying to interact at the same time that one is on a Zoom call, the other one has a Zoom call coming up. Be quiet, I got to take this call. I mean, there's a lot of that kind of problem. But if you have kids who are constantly
Right.
after you and they're not at school and they're knocking on the door and they're showing up in your your webcam, can be really, really stressful.
Yeah.
It's important that people have an end to their workday. And that used to happen when people would drive home from work or take the subway home or walk home, and they can decompress during that travel. And when they walk through the door of their apartment or home, I'm no longer at work. I now can devote 100% of attention to the rest of my life. And those lines are now totally blurred.
Well, they're blurred for two reasons. One is that, and the other is that when you get home, you're still on your phone, right?
Well,
When you started being a professor in the 70s and early 80s, were students getting in touch with you at 7 p.m.? I guess if they were, you had to have given them your home phone number.
never would do that. Never
Okay,
would do that.
right,
No, no.
and
At Friday afternoon, when everyone left campus, you were not in touch with your professor till Monday. So you made
right,
sure you had everything in line before that. And if something came up, you dealt with it the next week. There
yep.
was no contacting a professor. But just last night, I got emails. Some of my students are pre-registering for this or registering for the spring semester. 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. Dr. Bolander, my PIN number's not working to register. What do I do? And they're waiting for a response. It's 11 o'clock on a Sunday
Right.
night.
And with you, that's like 6 hours in a REM.
Actually, I'm just waking up.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, no, I'm the same way. I mean, I think there's a real benefit to being off the grid, like we just talked about, and there not only is there no time between where you get to go home, where you get to walk home or drive home. I mean, I'm going to walk home here shortly. I'm going to listen to a podcast on the way, and you can argue that in the city there's always things going on, so I can't clear my head anyway. But there is a moment where I'm not at work, I'm not yet at home, dealing with the issues that come with both those places. So there is that moment. But even when I get home, I mean, I'm guaranteeing at 9:30 tonight I will be checking email. I mean, my wife and I sit on the couch, watch something or talk, and we're on our computers all the time. And so there's no work at home anymore. It's just all
Right.
one big amalgamation of gunk.
Yeah, that multitasking is also very draining.
Mhm.
Watching your program and trying to talk and then answer an email and all those kinds of things. That's People, their brains weren't built to do that.
Yeah, what I was going to ask that is there research that you're supposed to be focused on a task, not 50 at a time, and
Well, first of all, multitasking, we use the term, but it really is a misnomer. When people, in quotes, multitask, what they really do is they quickly switch from one task to the next. You can only focus on one task at a time. So you end up switching between listening to a few words on the TV and then talking with your partner, maybe missing half of what they said, and responding to a few words, and then you look at your email. So you're switching rapidly between tasks. You're not really doing multiple things at one time, but it's still very draining to do that.
yeah, imagine. So that was doom and gloom for 40 minutes. Now
Yeah.
let's now let's talk about what things. Like, what do you tell people in your practice? What do you tell people that you interact with to break all get the election, COVID, connectivity, social media, all the things that we're anxious about, stressed about over time. We're not sleeping. We're taking anti-anxiety pills at an ever increasing rate. So what are some things that you would say to people to really implement in their life?
Okay, well, there's two kinds of coping that people can do. And coping is what you do to deal with stressors in your life. And COVID's a stressor, and so is the current political climate. And I will venture a guess it's going to continue for some time into the future, even after the election. Two kinds of coping. There's problem-focused coping, and there's emotion-focused coping. Problem-focused coping is you try to deal with the problem itself, like disconnecting from work for a certain number of hours a day, turning off your phone, those kinds of things that are going to be actual items you can do, behaviors you can accomplish that will reduce the amount of stress. So we talk about what are the problem-focused coping strategies you could use in your life. Like I have one patient she works at home, and she has young children, so she cannot tell them don't bother mommy for 8 hours because I'm working. I mean, she has to be attentive to these kids. So what are some of the things you can do to set up an environment where maybe they're going to be less distracting to you or less frustrating, that sort of thing.
Mhm.
The other kind of coping is emotion focused, where the problem exists and you can't do anything about it. But what do you do to soothe yourself? Can you engage in meditation? Can you engage in yoga? Can you do things to take care of your body? Can you develop a hobby? What are the positive things you can do? And there's a field of positive psychology, which I teach a course in that as well. And we go over a lot of interventions, and my students actually have done them this semester
Mhm.
and have reported that they feel a lot better doing them. Things as simple as they wrote a gratitude letter to someone who's done something wonderful in their life, but they
Mhm.
never really properly thanked them, and they delivered the letter in person if possible, but through Zoom if necessary. And that made them all feel absolutely tremendous to be able
Yep.
to thank somebody. We had an exercise where people performed acts of kindness. There's a variety of, we call them interventions like that. Cultivating optimism, reframing problems to try to see something positive that's coming from them. I'm
Mhm.
becoming stronger. I'm learning how to deal with stressors and so on. But a whole bunch of different things. Forgiveness, thinking of people in your life who you carry grudges against and actively working on forgiving them can be tremendously liberating. So all of these things are ways of helping you emotionally cope with the stressors that you cannot change.
Right. And so when you mentioned, because you mentioned to me meditation and yoga and things like that, and the common refrain, I'm sure, when you tell people this in your private practice or just generally is, I don't have time.
A tough time.
Yeah, I
That
don't have time.
that's the irony.
Right. And
I,
so, right. And so you don't have time because you're connected, but you need to get away from the connectedness too. And what I've done is I've just learned that I'm a morning person like you. I mean, I've been to the gym a lot in the last couple months because I just don't start work until I do that. That's just a rule that I've set. My wife is, taking me to task, or not taking me to task, has lit the fire and been, held me accountable. But I mean, what do you say to people who say, listen, Dr. Bolander, here's my day. I get up, the kids are there, I'm doing it, and then they get through their whole day and they list all these things, and it's 11 p.m. and they go to sleep.
right.
What do you say to those people?
Well, what we do is we find time windows in between those activities where they have 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes. You don't need to have a 30-minute meditation session a la a Buddhist monk
Mhm.
to find relaxation. 5 minutes will do it if you do it the right way, or even 5 minutes of relaxed breathing will be helpful. And there's so many apps now, Calm, Breathe to Relax, Headspace. There's all kind of apps you can get for your smartwatch or your
Mhm.
phone that will even remind you. Alarm will go off and remind you to stop, and they'll take you through looking at some beautiful pictures and
Mhm.
relaxing music, and a voice will lead you through a meditation. Everybody can find a few 5-minute times during the day to
Mhm.
be able to do that.
Yep.
If
And
if we really look at what their schedule's like.
right, and I think that one of the major issues is people that are unchecked. I mean, it's like this way with physical health too. If someone's unchecked and they live alone and no one kind of is like keeping tabs on them, then they can go off course pretty rapidly. But for most people, they have at least someone around that maybe you can set up a situation with someone where even if it's not a marriage or a best friend or something, you have a coworker that says, I'm going to do this if you promise to do that. And then you check in via text or via call and make sure that they're implementing it. So it's not just lip service. And 6 weeks later, they haven't done any of this stuff.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, you're exactly right. We call that social support,
mhm,
and it's one of the best protective factors against the negative effects of stress
mhm,
is having people in your life that will do those kinds of things for you. People you feel connected to, not through the phone, but on a personal level.
right,
Very, very important. But you're right. The person living alone is really having a problem. One of the things I could recommend is there's a website called Seven Cups of Tea,
mhm,
and there are trained listeners on the other end. These are not professionals and there's no cost involved, but you can contact Seven Cups of Tea just so you have someone to talk to, maybe give you some suggestions about things you can do, just a
mhm,
voice on the end of the line. You can even pick the person if you find someone. There's thousands of people around the world who are on the other end.
mhm,
Pick someone who resonates with you, someone who you feel is helpful. Some people specialize in different kinds of things. Some of them have been maybe abused, and if you want to talk about that, you can talk about that. But
mhm.
again, it's totally free. And 7 Cups of Tea is the website.
Right. Okay.
And so that would be a resource. There's other resources too. I'd given you one of an 8-week mindfulness
Hmm.
based stress reduction course,
Yeah.
which is free. It has lots of tips about yoga and meditation and so on. But if you know someone who's alone, or you know someone who doesn't have people checking in on them or whatever,
Hmm.
one of the acts of kindness you can do on a regular basis is just call them,
Hmm.
or if necessary, go set up a chair outside their window at their house. Take your mask off unless it's illegal in your location,
Yeah, right.
and have a conversation with them just through the open window. I've recommended this to some clients who do it with their parents who are in a nursing facility, and it's a wonderful experience for
Hmm.
everybody to have that face-to-face contact, even at a 15-20 foot distance.
Right.
It's so nice. So if you know someone like that, be that person who checks on them.
Yeah. And one thing that's going around Facebook, and you're not on Facebook, but one thing that's been going around is people reposting the National Mental Health Institute or National Suicide Prevention. There's like
Hmm.
a thing people are copy and pasting in their profiles that are basically saying, listen, I'm here, call me. And everyone's kind of in on that. And people, and I am too. I mean, everyone's kind of saying, listen, we're here to talk, and don't, if you're feeling depressed about COVID, because I know a lot of people are,
Hmm.
reach out to people, including, neighbors or
Yeah.
coworkers.
The number
So,
one objection to that,
yeah.
and I hear this all the time, I don't want to bother them. And then my question is, if they needed, if they wanted, they wanted you to talk to, or no, excuse me, they wanted you to talk to them or
Yep.
whatever, would you be willing to do it? And the answer is yes,
Of
I
course.
would. I mean,
Yeah.
I would not consider it a burden. So then figure that they don't, you don't consider it a burden either.
Right. Right. Right.
So yeah, just
With the way you can screen calls today, you can certainly not pick up the phone, but if you do, you're willing to talk to them. And if you post this thing on
sure,
your Facebook, you're willing.
sure,
I mean, you're kind of
obviously.
saying, I'm a. So real quick before we end here, what's that website for the 8-week? Because I just want you to say it, and then I'm going to put it in the link to the comments and everything.
Okay, it's one word, Palos mindfulness. Palos, Palouse,
Okay.
Palouse,
Okay.
mindfulness.com.
Okay.
And once you go to that website, there's tremendous number of resources. And I noticed that the person who put it up there, Dave Potter, wonderful guy, has also added a lot of COVID resources.
Mm.
If you have children, or if you have families or whatever, resources, videotapes, suggestions. There's dozens and dozens of those on that
Okay.
website. So it wouldn't hurt to look through them and find some help there as well.
Cool. Well, the last question I'll ask, famous last words from an attorney, but the last question I'll ask is so we talked about individuals, but if heads of companies are seeing this, or people in HR, or people that can make a structural change in their company, not just during COVID, but in general, what do you think could be implemented on a organization-wide basis? I mean, here we have yoga and meditation every week or every other week that we can sign into anytime. And I did it, and I was not expecting it to be as helpful as it was. It was a really wonderful half hour. But what could, besides that, I mean, so we already implement that. And I'm not asking just for our firm, but in general, what could people say through our organization or through our law firm or through our insurance company we could do to help our employees' mental health?
Cut Zoom meetings by 3/4
Okay.
and handle a lot of it through email or documents, editable documents everyone can access.
Okay.
But beyond that, the more that you make people's work life meaningful, so it feels like they're accomplishing something, they matter to the
Mhm.
company. Even if it's not raises, just some pats on the back, some acknowledgments. I really
Mhm.
appreciate the effort you put on that project. That can be a tremendous help in terms of giving people a sense of meaning and purpose, which is one of the protective factors against mental health
Mhm.
disorders, is feeling like you matter. The world's
Mhm.
a better place because I'm here. My company's a better place because I'm here. So that would be, I think, a very big thing companies can do, is and this can be from the head of the company all the way down through the supervisors to their base employees. Acknowledgement of a good job.
Mhm.
Thanks for a good job. I'm grateful for that you're working for the company. Goes a long way.
Yep. And the other thing that I've noticed that I've kind of said to some coworkers here is when I get an email before noon that says, "Good morning, Nate," or on a Monday, "Good morning, Nate. Hope your weekend was well." How long does that take to write? And then I'm in a great mood to read that email all the
Hmm.
time. If I get one in the afternoon, I try to, and people watching this will probably say, "We didn't do it for me," but I try to always say, "Good morning, good afternoon." I call people sir. I say
Hmm.
thank you. I say, if I'm following up on something, I just want to thank you again for what you've done to this point. I
Yeah.
do have one residual question, one follow-up. And it puts people like when I read that versus where's this, where's that from a plaintiff's attorney or someone, it's like I feel like you're coming at it aggressively versus and guarded versus open and welcoming, and you're going to try to help other people if they're treating you that way.
We all want to feel respected. We all want to feel appreciated. And a couple of words to begin your email and to end your email is not a small thing to do. I had a colleague here at the university who every day made sure that he sent a note and then later on an email when email came around every day to someone at the university, just acknowledging maybe they won some award or whatever, acknowledging that, hey, I'm really happy for you. It made him feel great, and it made the people who got those acknowledgments feel great because someone took the time to do that. If I have a student who wins an academic award, an athlete, let's say, they won academic All-American, whatever, I send a note, and that student, I mean, to come from a professor that you took the time to write a note that to congratulate me for winning this award, I mean, it's monumental. You don't underestimate how important that really is.
Well, I know from speaking to coworkers at many organizations, if a supervisor, whether it's right above you or two above you or the head of the company, says, great job, 2 words, they're on cloud 9 for 3 days.
Sure.
And you don't realize how much you impact people by the way you speak to them. And that's something we could all do every day, I think, in an organizational sense.
Sure, and again, it's a little more difficult on social media because you're typically not seeing the person. You're typing letters on a keyboard. It's very impersonal, and you often, if the person was sitting in front of you in your office, you might say something like that. But in a keyboard, you get right to business. You ask the question, and you miss that whole piece, which is unfortunate.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you. I'm going to be nice and say these words to you. I really appreciate you coming on the Defense Never Rests. It was great to have you.
I so appreciate being asked.
You're a great dad. I love it. We can just do this all the time.
We'll stop it here.
Yeah.
I really did enjoy it, and it's a tough time. And what I tell my students is we will get through this. Think about the things that you're learning about yourself and how strong you are to get through this. And you have to kind of reframe it in a positive fashion. This is what we're dealing with. We have no choice. Make the best of it that we possibly can, and we'll get through it.
You can't go back to pre-COVID era. This has occurred, and now what do you do with it is the question.
Yeah, you're living through one of the most important historical periods in life, and frankly, no one they have to be over 85 to have lived through something like this before, which would have been World War II, when the stress levels were high and families were losing soldiers, and you didn't know whether the United States would continue. That was really the last time we dealt with this sort of existential crisis, and so we're not prepared for it. We're not ready to deal with this. But when we come out of this, and we all will, we'll be the better for it.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your help, and I hope everyone watching this takes these things into consideration and implements them in their life, and actually makes the effort to do it, because it's a lot to make a plan, and it's a lot more to implement it. So I hope they do.
Well, just remember, if you change nothing will change. So
very good. Leave it with a dad is that's great. Well, thank you again for coming on, and enjoy the rest of your day.
My pleasure. You too. Take care.